Due to technical problems, I had to end the last PowerPoint in kind of an odd place, kind of in midstream. So just allow me to uh, recap where we were. We were talking about monism and dualism. Dualism being this idea that there are two things, duo, the mind and the body, that they're separate. The mind is a non-physical entity while the body is a physical one. And we were contrasting that to monism, or mono, one thing, that the mind and the body are equal to one another. They're the same kind of material. Um, now, monism could, many forms of monism anyway, would say that the mind simply is the brain. But there's a more nuanced version of monism. I like to call it embedded cognition. It takes an interactionist perspective. It says that, okay, sure, the brain is absolutely critical. You don't have a mind if you don't have a brain, but just having the brain on its own is not sufficient. That the brain needs to be put into a body, and that body needs to be able to interact with the world around it. Um, that it's only when you get the brain, the body, and the mind the brain, the body, and the environment all interacting together, it's not until then that you can say, ah, there's the mind. There's a nice argument by analogy here in the form of transportation. So if I were to ask you, the student, okay, show me transportation, point to transportation. Perhaps you'd show me a car. So, yeah, see, Dr. Woodruff, here is transportation in this car. And I'd say, well, okay, so is it in what part of the car? Is it in the seat? And you say, well, sure, yeah, the seat is transportation. And so, okay, so if I had a seat sitting here just on the garage floor, would I be able to be transported? And of course I wouldn't. I'd need the seat to be in the car. Well, how about the engine block? Is it in the engine? Sure. Transportation is in the engine. All right, well, if I had an engine block sitting on the floor of my driveway or of my garage, would I be able to sit on top of it and ride down the street, be transported? And of course not. So ultimately you get to the idea that transportation is not in any one part of the car. It'd have to be in the entire car itself, the totality of the car. But even then, I'd say, well, but it's just sitting still. It's just sitting there doing nothing. That's not transportation. I'd say, oh, okay, well, fine. We'll put it in motion. Oh, yeah, we'll set it off to go down the road. Well, but there's nothing in it. What's being transported? All right, well, here, we'll put a person in. Dr. Woodruff, you get in the passenger side. I'll drive. And so here, you and I were going down the street in our Camaro, and we're on the road, and we're being transported. And you say, look, I've shown you, Dr. Woodruff. Here it is. Here's transportation. I say, yes, thank you very much. You've done it. You've succeeded. You got the car on a road with an object to be transported, and you set that whole process in motion. You put all those parts together in just the right way. And there was transportation. And the mind, I would argue, is very similar. That it's not just enough to show me a brain. Just having a brain sit there on a table, that's not showing me a mind. You've got to hook that brain up to a body. That you want to have senses, sights and sounds and smells coming into the brain. And you want to have effectors, arms and legs that can go out in the environment and manipulate that environment. So it's not until you have those together, it's not until you have a brain inside a body that's interacting with an environment, it's not until those three things get together that you can point to them and say, look, Dr. Woodruff, there is a mind. Okay? So that's what the embedded cognition monistic view of mind says. Again, the mind is not this strange property that is non-physical. Nobody would say that transportation is non-physical, right? Well, the mind's not non-physical either. It's just a property that emerges when a brain interacts with a body that interacts with an environment. That's what the embedded cognition point of view says. And so if monism typically says the mind equals the body, embedded cognition would say, okay, the mind equals the body times the environment. So where are we at then? Now we've tried to define psychology as a science. We said that scientific psychologists must assume that all mental processes are physical in nature. We've said that the physical universe is deterministic. All physical processes are determined by the laws of physics. And we've said that the mind, therefore, if we're going to study the mind scientifically, we've got to assume that it is physical, and if it's physical, it's deterministic. All of its thoughts and its beliefs and its desires are all determined by the laws of physics. But what about something like free will? How's that going to work? I mean, free will is this notion that one is free to choose his or her actions, that there's nothing constraining your choices, that your choices are simply you making them. It's that there's certainly no one's forcing you. No one's putting a gun to your head forcing you to say take this class or to hit that cue ball. You just decide to hit the cue ball. And if it's going to be free will, we'd have to say that it's free of the physical universe. Certainly my decision to hit the cue ball is not a function of the laws of physics. Right? Now another way to define free will is that the idea that given an action X, like say hitting the cue ball, you could have chosen instead to perform action Y, say to not hit the cue ball. Given an action X, you could have chosen instead to perform action Y. Given that you hit the cue ball, you could have chosen not to hit the cue ball. So this is kind of a strange statement, really. So given that you hit the cue ball. What does that mean? Well, it says, well, okay, you hit the cue ball, and we want to say there were some causes of you hitting the cue ball. Well, you wanted to play pool with me, and you know that in order to play pool, you've got to hit the cue ball. So your desire to play pool and the knowledge that you have to hit the cue ball to do it, that those things would have been causes of you hitting the cue ball. But why again would be this idea that, well, okay, maybe you just broke your cue stick and walked out the door, so you didn't play pool with me. But what free will says is that with the same set of causes, say that you want to play pool and that you know that you have to hit the cue ball, that you could have chosen still to have just broken your cue stick and walked out of the pool hall. But that's kind of weird, right? I mean, why would you choose to break your cue stick and walk out of the pool hall when you really wanted to play pool and you knew that what you had to do was hit the cue ball, that is? Why would you choose to do that? But see, free will says that you could do that. That despite the fact that you have the desire to play pool, you could choose not to play pool. You could avoid the causes that are impinging on you, and you could step outside of those causes and make the choice to not play pool. But I mean, that's kind of strange. Now, how could that be? How could your decisions be free of the physical universe? I mean, that's what they'd have to be, right? If they were not caused, how could they be free of causation? They'd have to be non-physical. And decisions are something your mind does, right? But if things like decisions, things that your mind does, are non-physical, then we've already said this, you don't get to study the mind scientifically. So I don't think we want to assume that. Again, I mean, for this course, this is neuroscience. This is the science, the study of the brain and how it gives rise to the mind. And if the mind is not physical, then neuroscience has no business doing what it's doing. Psychology has no business doing what it's doing. So we've got to assume the mind is physical. But we can only make sense of this idea of free will in a non-physical mind. And so maybe free will is non-physical. Okay, well, how do we figure out whether that's true or not? Well, we could just go over to that non-physical universe and we could look for free will. And if we find it, we say, aha, look, see, there it is, there's free will. It's over here in the non-physical universe. So, okay, we just don't get to study it scientifically. But how could you ever know that? I mean, the non-physical universe, by definition, is non-systematic, non-orderly. If it were orderly, systematic, if it obeyed the laws of cause and effect, then it would be part of the physical universe. But it's not regular, it's not systematic, it's not orderly. That's what makes it non-physical. But if it's not systematic, it's not orderly, it's not regular, then how can we ever understand it or really even see it? I mean, it's going to look completely different every time we go to look at it. Because free will may look like one thing one day and something completely different the next. Why? Because there's no order, there's no systematicity here. There's no causality. There are no laws in the non-physical universe. So even if free will did exist over here in this strange non-physical universe, we could never know it. Even if the mind existed in this non-physical universe, we could never know that. But we do know of a mind, and our minds seem to be actually rather systematic and orderly. Right? In fact, psychology is well over 100 years old, and it's made quite a bit of progress in that 120, 130 years of its existence. And it could only make progress in a systematic and orderly universe. Progress couldn't happen in a non-systematic world, in a non-systematic universe, in a non-physical universe. So, it's unclear to me how we could save this notion. I think the mind could be physical. I could see how that could be, but I don't see how free will could be physical. I don't see how it could ever be studied scientifically. I don't see how it could be a cause or an effect of anything. Now, I've had students in the past that have gotten rather depressed about this idea. What are you talking about? How could we not have free will? This is very depressing. We don't get to choose our own thoughts and beliefs. They're chosen for us. Well, no. That's not right. The point is, your choices and beliefs are a function of the causal universe. Okay? And that's good, right? So people think, well, that's depressing to think I don't have free will. And I've had students tell me they're downright depressed. And I hope that whoever's listening to this is not getting depressed at these thoughts. In fact, I think you should be thankful that this is the case. Imagine if, say you have that desire to hit the cue ball, and you know that, or you have the desire to play pool, and you know that to hit the cue ball is the way to play pool. It's good that those desires will cause you to hit the cue ball. What if despite having those desires, you did all of a sudden just choose to break your cue stick and walk out the door? And I'm like, what the heck happened here? What? I don't understand. What did I do? And the point is, I didn't do anything. There's no cause of your decision. Your decision was completely free of any causality. Well, that means it has nothing to do with the situation you're in. Breaking your cue stick and walking out of the pool hall was not an appropriate response. And it was only made possible by the idea of your free will, the ability to act independently of the causes of the situation. And that's fine. I mean, I can tolerate you breaking the cue stick and walking out on me, for instance, right? But how would you survive? How would you survive? Suppose you just wound up stranded in a jungle and there are predators all around. Now, you want your decisions to be caused by the environment. You want your decisions to be caused by the fact that something's getting ready to eat you. You need to get out of there. Now, if you had free will, you could say, well, yeah, I would really like to live. I want to survive. I want to live to a ripe old age. I'm in a jungle here, and I know that if I just get moving, I can get out of it eventually. And I know that there are predators very nearby, and that if I just sit still, they're going to eat me. What free will would enable you to sit there and say, despite all that, I think I'm just going to sit here and just kind of look around. Well, what's going to happen? You're going to get eaten. That's what free will. Free will is the ability to make decisions that are not adaptive. They're not caused by the situation you're in. You don't want those. You want every decision you ever make to be a function of the situation you're in. That's the only way your decisions, your choices, are going to be rational and adaptive. Free will is the ability, really, quite honestly, to act insane. That's the best I can say for it. So I hope you don't find that a depressing viewpoint. It is pretty much an inevitable consequence of viewing the mind as a physical entity. That if we're going to approach the mind scientifically, we've got to view the mind as physical. But if you view the mind as physical, it couldn't have something like free will, because free will could not exist in the physical universe. Okay, well, in the next PowerPoint, we'll move on to talk a little bit about philosophy of science. Just touch on that and how it's relevant to the neuroscience that we will be investigating. And followed by that will be a discussion of the history of neuroscience.